I knew I was being erased the moment they moved my desk. Not fired, not demoted. Just relocated to the back corner of the office next to the humming server rack that sounded like a dying refrigerator. It's funny how silence can be louder than words. No one said a thing, but everyone understood what it meant. I was no longer part of the conversation, only the paperwork. And that was fine by me. For a while, I had joined Ecliptech Systems when it was barely more than a handful of engineers and a shared dream built out of caffeine and unpaid hours. Back then, I was the one who made sure things actually worked. Filed the incorporation docs, cleaned up the early contracts, found the tax loopholes that saved us from collapsing in our first year. When prototypes failed and tempers flared, I was the one who stayed late rewriting the compliance reports so our investors didn't see the cracks. "Mary's the glue," the founder used to say. "She keeps the ship from sinking." Somewhere along the way, glue became invisible. When the new CEO came in, crisp suit, MBA grin, and buzzwords sharp enough to cut glass, everything changed. He didn't shake my hand on his first day, just nodded vaguely, already looking past me. "We'll streamline operations," he said. Translation, he wanted names, not work. And in a world obsessed with titles, I was a nobody. Still, I didn't complain. I've seen empires built on ego collapse faster than a bad souffle. The secret to surviving in corporate jungles is simple. Never fight for credit. Fight for evidence. Paper trails don't forget. People do. So while the new leadership strutted through boardrooms pitching innovation decks I'd formatted, I stayed in my corner, doing what I did best. Documenting, reviewing, filing. Quietly. Meticulously. My name was on the fine print, not the headlines. Then one morning, during an all-hands meeting, I caught the CEO's words like a slap. "Mary just handles the paperwork," he said, chuckling. Brilliant with forms, though. Everyone needs one of those. Laughter rippled around the room. Polite, nervous laughter. The kind that fills space when no one wants to disagree with power. I smiled. Even clapped once. Because that's the trick, isn't it? You let them underestimate you. It's the only camouflage that never fails. What he didn't know, what none of them did, was that for the last 7 years, every time they'd filed a provisional patent, every time an engineer sketched an idea on a napkin, every time legal panicked over phrasing that might violate an NDA, it had gone through me. Every single one. Not because I demanded it, because no one else could translate the chaos into something the US Patent Office would actually approve. I wasn't a lawyer, but I was the one who made the messy genius of others make sense to the system. I knew which designs were real and which were smoke. And when you touch that much intellectual property, some of it touches back. That night, I stayed late again. Everyone else had gone home. Their Slack statuses switched to offline, but I was still at my desk reading a draft of our upcoming acquisition deck. The CEO was planning to sell Ecliptech to a conglomerate, one of those faceless giants that eats smaller companies for breakfast. And in his glowing presentation slides, I saw the future laid out in glossy bullet points. Streamlined transition, unified leadership, core assets fully secured. Except one thing wasn't secured, because buried inside the due diligence appendix, in the hundreds of filings, patents, and authorizations they'd need to prove ownership, were 54 documents that carried my signature. Some as co-author, some as sole drafter. All legally binding, all verifiable. And not once had anyone ever asked me to sign a work-for-hire clause. I sat there, staring at the screen while the office lights flickered in the reflection of the glass wall. For years, they'd dismissed me as the paper pusher, the note-taker, the quiet one. But the truth was written right there, black ink on federal records. I was the architect behind half of what they were selling. I didn't plan revenge. I didn't plan anything at all. I just printed copies, one set for home, one for the lawyer I quietly kept on retainer, a habit from years of watching startups implode. The next morning, I went to work as usual, smiled at reception, brought donuts, pretended nothing had changed, because for now it hadn't. The acquisition meeting was still 2 weeks away, but time is a funny thing when you know a storm is coming. Every joke about the paperwork girl, every condescending smile, every time they forgot my name on the slide deck, it all started to sound different, louder, almost like an overture before the curtain rises. And as I filed another set of irrelevant compliance documents, I felt something shift. They thought I was invisible, but I knew better. I wasn't the glue anymore. I was the foundation. And they were about to learn what happens when the foundation stops holding the weight. Because in business, just like in life, what you dismiss as paperwork can turn out to be the deed. And honey, mine had 54 signatures. The acquisition countdown had begun. Emails buzzed through the office like caffeine-fed hornets. Due diligence data room access, patent summary request, ownership verification pending. It was all happening fast. Too fast. Everyone was walking taller, dressing sharper, talking louder. The interns started wearing blazers. Even the engineers shaved. You could smell ambition in the recycled air. The CEO was in his element, strutting from meeting to meeting with that permanent tan and TED Talk confidence. This acquisition, he said at the Monday briefing, will redefine Ecliptech's legacy. We're finally being recognized for our innovation. I stood at the back, clipboard in hand, taking notes like always. He didn't look at me once. Nobody did. That's the thing about being invisible. You see everything. After the meeting, I went back to my corner and checked the shared drive. The buyers, a conglomerate called Traiciones Technologies, had already begun reviewing our intellectual property. Every file I'd ever touched was in that folder. Every draft, every revision, every filing number. And there it was, in plain sight. Inventor, Mary S. Leland, 54 times. I stared at my own name as if it belonged to someone else. Years of quiet, late-night work reduced to a line item. But those lines were starting to glow like fuse wires. Because I knew what Traiciones would find. They'd see that the person who just handled paperwork had authored the very filings that determined Ecliptech's valuation. That afternoon, I overheard the CEO in the hallway talking to our CFO. "We'll make this clean," he said, his voice too casual. "The buyers don't need to know who drafted what. It's company property." The CFO hesitated. "But Mary's admin." The CEO cut in, his smile audible. "She doesn't own a thing." I smiled to myself. That word again. Admin. It's what men say when they don't know how to define competence that doesn't look like theirs. I stayed quiet, of course. Quiet is where power grows. Over the next few days, I became a ghost haunting my own legacy. I'd see my work in presentations, my phrasing in legal summaries, my language in investor decks, all stripped of my name. Maddening? Sure. But I'd learned long ago. Emotion clouds precision, and precision was my weapon. By Thursday, Traiciones had started requesting clarifications. I saw the emails as they came in. Please confirm inventorship details for filings 2043 to 2057. Requesting original documentation of co-author acknowledgement. The CEO's assistant forwarded them straight to legal, tagging the CEO with, "Handled internally. No need to involve Mary." They were panicking. Quietly. You can always tell when a leader starts copying legal on every sentence. That evening, I got a message from an old friend, Dylan, one of the engineers from the early days. He'd been looped into the acquisition team as a technical consultant. "Hey Mary, quick one. Traiciones asked if you're still with the company." "Why?" My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I typed, "Because they finally read the fine print." I didn't elaborate. On Friday morning, the CEO called a core team alignment session. Translation, damage control. I wasn't invited, naturally, but my access still worked. Years of setting up compliance systems had their perks. So while they were in the glass conference room upstairs, I opened the shared folder titled IP Due Diligence Response. Inside were edited drafts of the filings, mine, with my name replaced by corporate entity Ecliptech Systems. I leaned back, exhaled, and let the weight of it settle. They weren't just ignoring my work anymore. They were rewriting history. I didn't confront them. Not yet. I just began quietly restoring the truth. I opened my private archive, the one I'd built out of habit, and cross-referenced every altered document against the originals I'd printed and time-stamped years ago. Each carried a federal filing ID, an unchangeable digital record. You can Photoshop a name, but you can't rewrite a timestamp in the USPTO database. By the time the office emptied for the weekend, I'd built my own folder. 54 PDFs, perfectly ordered, annotated, undeniable. I renamed it Inheritance, because that's what it was. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake replaying every meeting, every time someone had taken credit for my work, every time I'd stayed late so someone else could present my findings the next morning. It wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. I thought about what Dylan once said years ago, when we were debugging a prototype at 2 a.m. "Mary, you're the system." I'd laughed then, but now I understood. Without me, the company didn't run. It merely pretended to. Monday arrived with its usual fake cheer. The CEO strutted into the office with a fresh haircut and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "The acquisition board meets Wednesday." Let's make it seamless. That word stuck in my mind all day. Seamless meant no interruptions, no surprises. And yet, surprises were exactly what Traiciones was about to find. Because while they thought I was the paperwork girl, I was also the paper trail. And in the world of billion-dollar acquisitions, the paper trail isn't background noise. It's the truth. And the truth has a way of resurfacing, especially when it carries your name 54 times in black ink. By Tuesday morning, the air in the office felt heavier. You could almost taste the panic hiding under the smell of burnt coffee and ambition. The acquisition board from Traiciones was scheduled to arrive the next day. Everyone was pretending to be calm, but the nervous energy crackled through the hallways like static. I watched from my desk as the CEO rehearsed his vision speech in the glass conference room, gesturing dramatically at slides that weren't his. He'd been talking for weeks about clean IP portfolios and streamlined ownership structures. Phrases that sounded good until someone actually checked them. And someone had. At 9:47 a.m., an email popped into my inbox. Forwarded by accident, as most good things are. The subject line read, "Urgent, Inventorship Verification Inquiry." The message was short. A Traiciones legal associate was requesting direct confirmation from Ms. Leland regarding filings number 2028 to number 2082. It was polite, clinical, but I could feel the tremor between the lines. They'd seen my name. I knew what that meant. They were starting to question who really owned what they were buying. 10 minutes later, my office phone rang. An internal call from HR. "Hey, Mary," came the bright, artificial tone of Kara, our HR director. "The CEO would love to have a quick chat upstairs, just to align before the board meeting." I almost laughed. Align. That's what they call it when they're about to ask you to disappear quietly. When I stepped into the executive floor, the atmosphere shifted. The receptionist didn't smile this time. The blinds were half closed, casting long shadows across the hallway. The CEO's assistant gave me a tight nod and gestured toward the small conference room. Inside were 3 people: the CEO, Kara from HR, and Tom from legal. The same trio you see in every story that ends with the word termination. "Mary," the CEO said smoothly, "thanks for coming up." He was smiling too hard. "We've had a little misunderstanding in the acquisition paperwork. Nothing serious, just some clerical mix-ups involving your name on old filings." "Mix-ups?" I asked, my voice calm. He nodded quickly. "Yes, apparently your name was listed as an inventor on some legacy patents. Total coincidence, of course. The buyers just need clarification that you were in an administrative role, not a contributing one." Tom slid a document toward me across the table. A single-page statement, already printed. My name at the top. At the bottom, a signature line. This confirms that any inventorship or authorship listings naming Mary S. Leland were administrative in nature and do not imply ownership or intellectual contribution. I read it once, then again, slowly. Kara shifted uncomfortably. The CEO kept smiling. "Once you sign, this all goes away," he said. "We can't have delays, you understand. Traiciones needs clarity before tomorrow's session. I set the paper down. You want me to disclaim the patents?" "It's just formality," he replied quickly. "You're not giving anything up." "It's symbolic," I smiled faintly. Funny thing about symbols. They tend to have meaning. His jaw tightened. "Mary, this isn't personal." "Of course it isn't," I said. "It's business." And in business, we verify everything. I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila folder. Their expressions changed immediately. Inside were the original filing copies, stamped, dated, and certified by the patent office. My signature sat neatly beside the former CTO's. Tom leaned forward, his eyes scanning the documents. "Where did you get these?" "I filed them," I said. Silence. Just the faint hum of the air conditioner and the sound of the CEO's pen tapping against the table. He tried one last time, voice low. "You realize what this could do to the acquisition? You could cost us millions, Mary. Think carefully." "I have," I said quietly. "For years." Then I slid the folder toward him. "You wanted paperwork. Here it is." The room froze. No shouting, no dramatic outbursts. Just 3 people realizing they'd underestimated the wrong woman. Tom finally cleared his throat. "We'll review this," he muttered, collecting the papers with trembling hands. "Please do," I said, standing. "And while you're at it, check the federal database. You'll find my name there too." I left before they could respond. Back at my desk, I felt strangely calm. Not triumphant, not vindictive, just steady. For years, I'd been the one cleaning up their mistakes, writing the language that saved them from lawsuits, making sure every document was airtight. I had always protected the company, and now the protection ran both ways, whether they liked it or not. By late afternoon, whispers started spreading. People were talking in low voices near the break room. One of the engineers mentioned that the acquisition review had hit a snag. I didn't ask. I just kept typing, updating a report that no one would read. At 6:12 p.m., another email landed in my inbox, this time directly from Traiciones Legal. "Ms. Leland, we appreciate your prompt verification earlier today. Could you please confirm your contribution scope for the remaining filings as well? Our audit indicates 54 documents naming you as inventor or co-inventor. No one at Ecliptech had copied me on that thread, which meant Traiciones had reached out independently. The buyers had found the truth. And tomorrow, when they sat in that boardroom with the CEO boasting about his streamlined portfolio, they'd have a very different picture of what they were buying. They'd realize the paperwork girl wasn't background noise. She was the backbone. And the backbone was done bending. By the time I reached the office on Wednesday morning, the tension had a smell. Burnt coffee, nerves, and panic disguised as perfume. The Traiciones acquisition team was already there, all suits and smooth smiles, setting up in the glass conference room that everyone at Ecliptech now called the stage. I passed the CEO in the hallway. He didn't look at me, just straightened his tie, adjusted his cufflinks, and walked faster. That was my first clue something had cracked. The second came 10 minutes later when legal sent out a vague message about minor delays in documentation review. In corporate language, that's code for something's on fire. I stayed at my desk, close enough to hear the muffled voices upstairs, but far enough to remain invisible. At 9:15, the first email hit. Request for clarification. Inventor listings and ownership structure discrepancies. Filings number 2028 to number 2082. Requesting full documentation. They'd found it. The same folder of filings the CEO had tried to bury under corporate entity revisions. And now Traiciones wanted answers. Around 10 a.m., the conference room door opened and Kara from HR appeared at my desk, pale and tight-lipped. "Mary," she said softly, "they need you upstairs." "Now, do they?" I asked. "Yes, please." Her tone wasn't a request. It was resignation. When I walked into that room, the temperature seemed to drop. Around the table sat the CEO, two Traiciones lawyers, our CFO, and the head of legal. Laptops glowed. Papers were spread out like debris after a storm. The CEO smiled, that thin, strained version of a smile people wear when they've already lost but don't know it yet. "Mary," he said, "thank you for joining us. We just need to clear up a few details for our friends from Traiciones one of the lawyers." A silver-haired woman with calm, surgical eyes gestured for me to sit. "We appreciate your time, Miss Leland. There seem to be multiple filings where you are listed as inventor or co-inventor. Could you confirm that's accurate?" I nodded. "It is." The CEO jumped in, fast. To clarify, Mary supported documentation efforts. She didn't contribute to the lawyer raised her hand. "Mr. Kent, we're aware of your position. What we need to understand is how your company's IP valuation reached $2.4 billion when a single employee appears to have authored most of the underlying patents." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through steel. I could feel everyone's eyes shift toward me. The woman they'd ignored for years, now sitting quietly with the power to tilt the table. The lawyer continued, flipping through the binder. "Filings related to adaptive sensor frameworks, firmware compliance logic, data compression algorithms, all list Ms. Leland. That's unusual for someone classified as administrative staff." The CEO tried again. "She's being modest about her role." "She organized the paperwork. It's a legacy formatting issue." The lawyer didn't even blink. "We verified the USPTO records. The signatures are original, timestamps valid, and the inventor acknowledgments filed under oath. That's not formatting. That's authorship." I stayed quiet. I didn't need to defend myself. The documents already had. Finally, the lawyer turned to me. "Ms. Leland, were you compensated through any work-for-hire agreement for these filings?" I shook my head. "No contract." I was a salaried employee at the time, but no separate agreement regarding IP ownership. That was it. The detonator. Traiciones' second representative leaned forward, his tone now colder. "Then Ecliptech cannot prove ownership. These filings form the core of your valuation. If they don't belong fully to the company, we can't proceed." The CEO's voice cracked. "This is insane. She's just admin." The lawyer looked at him steadily. "Then you should have read your own contracts." It was quiet after that. Not peaceful quiet, the kind that hums with humiliation. The CFO looked down at his notepad. Legal rubbed his temples. Kara stared at the wall. I spoke only once more. "You asked for clarity," I said softly. "Now you have it." The CEO looked at me, fury barely hidden behind his eyes. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I met his stare. "Protected the truth." The meeting adjourned without ceremony. The Traiciones team gathered their binders and left with curt nods. The CEO stayed seated, unmoving. I walked out, feeling every set of eyes on my back, the same ones that had once looked through me. Back at my desk, I sat down, opened my laptop, and typed a short message to legal. Happy to provide any additional verification needed for federal filings. Please note that all original documentation remains intact and timestamped in compliance archives. Send. By late afternoon, whispers turned into noise. Someone said the deal had been paused for review. Someone else said Traiciones was reconsidering the valuation. I didn't need confirmation. I knew what that meant. At 5:32 p.m., an email arrived from the founder, the man who'd once called me the glue. "Mary, please meet me in the boardroom at 7. Just you and me. No subject line, no pleasantries. Just a quiet request from someone who finally remembered my name." I closed my laptop, leaned back in my chair, and exhaled slowly. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. Tomorrow, I'd decide whether to rebuild with them or let it all burn. The boardroom was half dark when I arrived that evening. Only one light glowed above the long table, the kind that hums softly like it knows what's coming. The founder sat alone at the far end, sleeves rolled up, eyes tired. He looked older than I remembered, older than he should have in his early 50s. The bravado was gone. "Mary," he said quietly, gesturing for me to sit. "You probably know why you're here." "I have a guess," I replied. He gave a weary nod. "The deal's frozen. Traiciones won't move forward until they verify the ownership on those filings. Legal says your name is on 54 of them." He paused, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You were never supposed to be erased, you know." Things got political. I leaned back in the chair, folding my hands. Political? That's an elegant word for pretending someone doesn't exist. He sighed. "Look, I know you've been treated unfairly. But this deal, it's life or death for the company. 200 people could lose their jobs. If there's any way to fix this..." I let him talk. The same man who once told me I was the glue now sounded like someone begging the glue not to dry. When he finally stopped, I said, "You don't need to fix this. You just need to tell the truth." His eyes flickered. "You could sign a release, Mary. Assign your rights to the company retroactively. We'll compensate you." Generously, there it was. The offer. The kind that comes wrapped in guilt and desperation. "Compensation," I repeated softly. "You mean hush money?" He didn't deny it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Outside the boardroom, the office was quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when people are afraid to be seen leaving. "I don't want to ruin anyone's career," I said finally. But I won't lie. I built half the systems this company runs on. I wrote the language that got us through audits, the filings that protect our products. You sold innovation that was mine to people who never bothered to ask who made it. And now, suddenly, it matters. He looked down at the table. "You're right." The words surprised me. He said them without defensiveness, without spin, just exhaustion. "I let him sideline you," he said. "The new CEO. He wanted control. I thought it was strategy. It was ego. We should have done better by you." "That's true," I said quietly. "But recognition after erasure isn't justice. It's cleanup." He met my eyes. "Then what do you want, Mary?" That was the question, wasn't it? For years, I'd wanted nothing. No spotlight, no promotion, just respect for doing things right. But now, sitting there with 54 patents tied to my name and a billion-dollar deal on ice, I realized I did want something. Not revenge, not money, something simpler. "I want the record corrected," I said, publicly. "I want the filings to stay under my name. I want the truth in the documents you hand to Traiciones and in every investor report that follows. No edits, no substitutions." He hesitated. "That's fair, but they'll want you to stay, to manage the transition." "I'll consider it," I said. "Under one condition, that man never steps foot in my department again." He nodded slowly. "The CEO's already gone. The board asked for his resignation an hour ago. I blinked, not hiding my surprise. That fast? The buyers wanted a sign we're serious about accountability." He was the sign it was quiet again. Then, almost reluctantly, he smiled. The first real one I'd seen from him in years. "You know, they told me Traiciones lawyers called you the invisible asset. That's what they wrote in their report." I smiled faintly. "I've been called worse." We signed the agreement before midnight. Nothing fancy, just a legal acknowledgement of contribution, ownership, and reinstatement. My title changed from administrative support to director of intellectual property and compliance. A mouthful, but the right kind of one. The next morning, the internal announcement hit everyone's inboxes at once. I didn't read the comments, but I heard the whispers in the hallway. Some were surprised. Some were embarrassed. A few, maybe, were proud. Traiciones resumed due diligence 2 days later. This time, the binder with my name on it stayed closed. Not because it was hidden, but because everything inside it had already been verified. When the deal finally closed, the founder came by my office with a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "Thank you for saving us from ourselves." And beneath it, a check. Not a fortune, but fair. A token of gratitude that felt earned. I didn't cash it right away. I left it on my desk for weeks, beside the framed printout of one of the first patents I ever filed. Sometimes, when the office got too loud, I'd glance at it and remind myself why I stayed. Not for them. Not even for vindication. But because every company, every system, needs someone who still believes that truth, written clearly and signed honestly, is the only thing that lasts. Paper doesn't forget. It doesn't flatter or betray. It just waits. And when the time comes, it speaks louder than any boardroom ever could.